They walked onto that stage looking like two ordinary teenagers, quiet, a little nervous, almost easy to overlook. But within moments, something extraordinary happened. The room changed, the audience leaned in, and by the time the final note faded, Jonathan, Antoine, and Charlotte Jaconelli were no longer just students from Essex, they were a phenomenon. But here's the part no one really talks about. Because while the world saw harmony, applause, and standing ovations, something else was quietly unfolding behind the scenes. A shift, a question, a tension that would eventually change everything. What really happened between Jonathan and Charlotte after the spotlight faded? Was it loyalty that kept them together, or limitations that pulled them apart? And when the music stopped, what was left? This is the story behind the voices. The moments you didn't see, and the truth that's far more complicated than anyone expected. Before the fame, before the millions of viewers, before the pressure of the spotlight, there were just two teenagers living very ordinary lives. Jonathan Antoine and Charlotte Jaconelli attended West Hatch High School in Essex. They weren't a duo. They weren't even particularly close. They were simply two students who loved music, each following their own path, unaware that their lives were about to intersect in a way that would define their futures. The turning point came in the most unexpected setting. Not a competition, not an audition, but a wedding. Their music teacher, Jeanette Brown, had a simple idea. She wanted her students to perform at her wedding, and something about Jonathan and Charlotte stood out to her. She paired them together, asking them to sing The Prayer, a song known for its emotional depth and technical challenge. At the time, neither of them thought much of it, but the moment they began to sing, something clicked. Jonathan's powerful, operatic tenor blended with Charlotte's smooth, theatrical soprano in a way that felt almost effortless. It wasn't just technically impressive, it was emotional, moving, and completely unexpected. Even they were surprised. That one performance, meant to be nothing more than a heartfelt contribution to a teacher's special day, became the foundation of everything that followed. Because after that, they started to wonder, what if this wasn't just a one-time thing? With encouragement from their teachers and vocal coaches, they began training together, refining their sound, building trust, and slowly evolving into something more than just classmates. They became a duo, and not long after, they made a decision that would change their lives forever. They auditioned for Britain's Got Talent. Walking onto that stage, in 2012, Jonathan and Charlotte didn't exactly fit the mold of typical stars. There was no flashy entrance, no over-the-top confidence. If anything, they seemed understated, almost fragile. And then came the moment that nearly changed everything. Before they even sang a note, Simon Cowell looked at them and made an assumption, one that would spark one of the most talked-about moments in the show's history. He questioned whether Charlotte was holding Jonathan back. In front of millions of viewers, he suggested that Jonathan might be better off performing alone. It was blunt. It was uncomfortable. And for a split second, it felt like the duo might unravel before they'd even begun. But then, Jonathan did something no one expected. He didn't hesitate. He didn't second-guess. He simply said no. No, he wouldn't go solo. No, he wouldn't leave Charlotte behind. Because to him, this wasn't just about talent. It was about loyalty, friendship, and something deeper than individual success. That moment changed everything. Because when they finally began to sing, the room fell silent. Their performance of The Prayer was nothing short of breathtaking. The emotion, the control, the harmony, it was undeniable. Whatever doubts had existed moments before were completely erased. And suddenly the narrative shifted. They weren't just contestants anymore. They were contenders. Week after week, Jonathan and Charlotte proved that their connection wasn't a fluke. They advanced through the competition, each performance stronger than the last. Their voices grew more confident, their chemistry more natural, their presence more commanding. And something else began to happen. People connected with them, not just because of their talent, but because of their story. They represented something rare in the entertainment world. Authenticity. When they performed Caruso in the semifinals, it wasn't just technically impressive, it was emotionally overwhelming. The audience didn't just hear the music, they felt it. Even Simon Cowell, who had once suggested they split, began to reconsider. He admitted that keeping them together might have been the right decision after all. And just like that, the doubt that once threatened to divide them became part of their narrative, a turning point that made their journey even more compelling. By the time they reached the finals, Jonathan and Charlotte weren't just participants in a competition. They were one of its defining acts. Their final performance brought everything full circle. Returning to the prayer, they delivered a rendition that was more polished, more powerful, and more emotionally resonant than ever before. They didn't win the competition, but in many ways it didn't matter, because they had already won something far more valuable, the hearts of millions. After the show, success came quickly. Record deals, media appearances, a rapidly growing fan base. They signed with a major label and released their debut album, which climbed the charts and confirmed what many had already believed. This wasn't just a TV moment. This was a real career. Their second album followed, building on that success while hinting at something subtle but significant: change. Because beneath the harmony, beneath the polished performances and commercial success, something was beginning to shift. Not dramatically, not publicly, but quietly. Their musical tastes, once aligned, were starting to diverge. Jonathan was drawn deeper into classical opera, embracing the power and tradition of that world. Charlotte, on the other hand, found herself increasingly pulled toward musical theater, storytelling, and contemporary styles. At first, it wasn't a problem. Differences can strengthen a partnership, but over time, those differences became harder to ignore. And then came the moment that made it impossible to avoid. When discussions began for a third album, something unexpected happened. They couldn't agree. Not on one song, not on one direction, not on one shared vision for what came next. It wasn't dramatic. There were no arguments, no falling out. Just a quiet realization. They were no longer heading in the same direction. For two people who had built everything together, that realization was both simple and devastating. Because sometimes the hardest endings aren't caused by conflict. They're caused by growth. After taking time to reflect, they made the decision. They would go their separate ways. The split in 2014 marked the end of an era, but not the end of their story. And what makes it so compelling is this. There was no scandal, no betrayal, no dramatic fallout. Just two people acknowledging that who they had become no longer aligned with who they were when they started. Still, that didn't make it easy. They had spent years side by side, on stage, in studios, navigating fame together. Letting go of that kind of partnership isn't just a professional decision. It's personal. And even though they handled it with maturity and respect, there was an undeniable sense of loss. Because something real had ended. In the years that followed, their lives moved in different directions. Jonathan stepped fully into the world of classical music, releasing solo albums that showcased the depth and power of his voice. He built a reputation as a serious artist, performing internationally and continuing to evolve. Charlotte found her place in musical theater, where storytelling and performance took center stage. On stage, she wasn't just singing, she was becoming characters, exploring emotion in a different way. Both succeeded, both grew, but something else happened too: distance. Not just physically, but emotionally. In later interviews, Jonathan admitted that they didn't speak often anymore. Not because of any lingering tension, but because life had simply moved on. Careers, schedules, new priorities, the kind of things that quietly reshape relationships over time. For fans who had once seen them as inseparable, it was a difficult reality to accept, but it was also an honest one. And yet, despite the distance, there has never been bitterness between them. When they speak about each other, it's with respect, with gratitude, with an understanding of what they shared and what they achieved together. Because some connections don't disappear. They just change. As the years passed, both Jonathan and Charlotte continued to evolve, not just as artists, but as individuals. Charlotte embraced her identity more openly, sharing her personal journey and becoming a voice for authenticity and self-expression. She connected with audiences in new ways, not just through performance, but through honesty. Jonathan underwent his own transformation, focusing on his health, his mindset, and his sense of purpose. His journey wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a process of taking control of his life and redefining who he wanted to be. In many ways, both of them were doing the same thing, growing, separately. And that brings us to the question that still lingers. After everything, the success, the split, the years apart, what comes next? Could they ever perform together again? It's a question fans continue to ask, and the answer isn't entirely clear. They've never ruled it out. The respect is still there. The history is still there. And the magic they created together hasn't been forgotten. But whether their paths will ever cross again on stage is something only time can answer. What we do know is this: Jonathan Antoine and Charlotte Jaconelli weren't just a duo, they were a moment. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful connections aren't meant to last forever, but that doesn't make them any less meaningful. Because for a brief period of time, two voices came together and created something unforgettable. And even now, years later, people still remember how it felt. Not just to hear it, but to believe in it. And maybe that's the real story. Not what went wrong, not what ended, but what existed in the first place. A partnership built on trust, a journey shaped by growth, and a legacy that continues separately but still connected in the memories of everyone who witnessed it. Because sometimes the most beautiful harmonies don't last forever, but they echo long after the music fades.